Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Man at YouTube with another model video. Back to a Gundam kit, HGUC Zaku-Mariner type. Very similar and shares quite a few parts with the old F2 HGUC kit we've built a long time ago. One of my favourite all-time kits, and a lot of parts that carried on to current HGUC kits, a lot of the Origin and Zakus we're dealing with. Now, this kit is very cool as it retrofits a lot of the old MSV design stuff from the vintage 1980 models, but all in an updated HGUC shell. There are problems, but there's ways that we can fix it and jazz it up quite nicely. The kit has only 5 runners, low parts count, polycaps included, a terrible colour palette injected into the plastic, overly heavily reliant on stickers, not a concern of ours, with the standard layout of instructions, colour guide for the painters, and a whole variety of poses and how to depict it from the show. If you were to approach this from a snapper's point of view, these are a little hard to come across, by the way. You're not going to have a great time. It's going to be quite bland, even with jazzing up with Gundam markers and washes and the sorts. Breaking the rules from starting from step 1, we've darted around the instructions and grabbed as many parts that come together in 2 halves, and we wanted to fill the seam line. Used Tamiya plastic cement to weld them together. Bit of putty of a mix of Squadron, and finally laying Mr. Dissolve putty on top, allowing a few days to dry and sanding it the very next day. Almost all the limbs, the torso and the weapons are plagued with seams. Quite a long process, but this is a large bulk of the kit and project done. The whole first session was addressing these, the second session sanding and re-following up. Being an underwater military unit, much like a submarine, they seem to be very well maintained, painted, and the peak of operation. We're going to want a gloss finish for an underwater look, very clean, bit of shading, obviously, of course. This is where the importance of proper removal of nubs, any sort of flash marks, and especially the addressment of those seams is very, very important and easily seen no matter what view we're looking at. In between that, we also looked at the colour separation. It's going to all blend in, but we want it to separate, and so washes and weathering methods don't affect it. We widened all joints to make sure the pegs aren't going to break after painting or the weathering process. The cutting and removal of the new parts that don't require any putty work started with the feet and worked its way out, with all of this detail in mind, assembling to such a state. I am surprised that we do have maximum amount of articulation and posability due to such a small collection of parts, and a fair amount of colour separation is present with all the gluing we had to put together. With all the subtle new detail not yet seen on a Zaku for a very, very long time, and all the work that we've done polishing to this state, we are rewarded with a kit that's strongly in line with what a scale modeler is looking for a decent project. With the seams and colours, it's almost like the kit is whispering, snappers, toy collectors, please do not apply. Not to knock them back or anything, they do have the real grade line and other projects that are very suitable and harder to model and paint around. After a bit of a break, each part corresponding to a collection of colours was stored in a Ziploc bag to be painted in various stages of effects, mounted on skewers and primed, looking for any further imperfections to be ironed out just before buffing and painting. The grey weapons and inner detail-esque surfaces were sprayed with a few layers of metallics, starting at a metallic black gunmetal, building up to quite a bright silver and encased in automotive lacquers. One stone dry, black wash applied, chucked straight in the bag for later. Very quick process. The light green pieces were next, mounted on pegs, sprayed with Tamiya primer, left a very beautiful smooth surface. None of the seams split or anything popped out that was quite nasty. Quick buff, and after just sticking to my stomach and picking out paints that just blend and look really good in a gradient shade effect, were plopped on the table and built up from a dark tone to a lighter tone. A bit of light pencil and pigment weathering, all encapsulated again in automotive gloss, and whatever detail these parts weren't very heavy in, picked out with a black wash and heavily cleaned back for that pin flowing effect. The last of the parts were a bit darker in tone, as well as more complex in shape, or required a fair amount of masking. Same process of the primer, buffing, the selection of 3 similar toned colours to build up in intensity shading, and finish off in a very similar state, left to, after a few days drying, the application of Tamiya yellow masking tape and building up further layers where it's appropriate for mask or breakout of colours that colour separation didn't allow for. Small, completely irrelevant parts with drastically different colours were also set aside and done in a completely different state, all of them definitely requiring hand painting or masking in the colours that were required. Everything was grouped together. Tiny amount of touch-ups and hand painting were applied where appropriate. Further more pin washing, and that was pretty much done straight into water slides. And with all the wonderful Zeonic marine Zagok and GOG style designs of Decaling, you did have to get a little heavy with that, and even borrowing a bit from the military field. Just before getting into that, liquid black or smoke also tickled some areas for a heavier buildup of shadowing and underwater soot or dirtening for a more drastic effect. I'm pretty pleased how a heavier toned shading did come across this, again simulating the drastic breaking up of light that does occur underwater, and definitely deciding to go for that underwater scheme. Decals were applied, a pose slightly worked out, and further heavily shading of liquid black were applied to give the correct brightness of the decals, especially the larger ones, numbers. Pulling out the Badger Sota 2020 airbrush, very fine water shimmering marks were airbrushed all over the shop, and a red half circle clear gem installed in the head as a mono eye. A very cheap base was purchased online, and a bit of a water effect were painted up with some cotton fluff. Was all purposed together with clear PVA glue to build up a base of it just penetrating a water surface and air permeating back to the surface. Everything got a treatment of satin varnish and a very light amount of gloss for just an appropriate finish of not being too deep in perfect sheen, but a nice soft wet look to the whole process. This absolutely concluded the build. Going back to the diorama remark, clear glue or PVA glue is also used to stick all the painted pieces together after the painting process or sub-assembly. This doesn't damage any of the painted bits or the plastic, and also lends itself to enamel based washes without damage. This concludes this very simple and basic kit into a very elaborate and time consuming build. I wouldn't say I've spent a lot of time on it, but taken very large breaks and putting small shots of time here and there, probably amounting to under 15-20 hours. Very happy to use this as a display piece. It is a very, very rewarding build and experience. Definitely something I highly recommend if you're looking for a certain amount of charm, proportion and detail in the kit to push into something for a storytelling piece, diorama or background filler, but not necessarily something that people want to buy, snap, put straight on the shelf. If you're a fan of vintage models, the Zaku series, Double Zeta and Unicorn, and building up a collection, it's very worthwhile. And even if you go to the minimum of rattle canning all the pieces into a different scheme, a little extra work that you don't normally do will polish this up just enough for your purposes. But to be a true display piece, those seams must be addressed, though are not that much extra effort as they looked in this video. A matte scheme is also perfectly acceptable for something on the rough end. All that, thank you very much for watching. As always, until next time, stay tuned for further content where when we do a review on the kit, it's not putting it together but more of an in-depth look of what we can do with a kit and having a bit of a study of certain details and aspects that are not normally acknowledged. Have a look at the description down below for links to social media, more information and references on the project. If you've enjoyed it, would love to hear about it, and we shall catch you guys next time.